Alright guys, so things are unraveling once again. Every day brings with it a new disaster, and most of the time the event is self-inflicted. And when the collateral damage piles up, everyone gets a shocked look with a Pikachu face. And now we have the US doing desperate deals to save themselves in the chip war. Now that was what happened with the Middle East, all those deals were all about. But once again, the US believed they could survive without selling to China. Is this hubris that's going to make them lose a $50 billion market? Well, Jensen Huang is pushing back on Washington's short-sighted plan, and check out how he blasted the chip controls that are still going on today. All in all, the export controls were a failure. The US should maximize the speed of AI diffusion. If they don't, the competition will come. Now this is really obvious. China has the resources, the money, and 50% of the world's AI developers in one single country. And here's the critical part. Nvidia realizes that China will catch up. If Chinese companies don't build on American architecture like Nvidia chips, they will build elsewhere. So this is a not so subtle hint to Trump. You need to U-turn today and you need to do it fast, or the Chinese market will be lost forever. It's just a matter of time. Now Jensen understands how urgent the situation is today. China has all the advantages, especially in this trade war. And make no mistake, Beijing is not losing the confrontation with Trump. America's trade war is only going to jack prices up for domestic US chip companies, while China is playing the game on easy mode when it comes to the cost of research and development. Their input costs are much lower, and the progress is simply outstanding. Before Biden took office, Nvidia had 95% of Chinese market share. That's total dominance back then. There was no threat, and China then couldn't really be bothered to make their own high-tech chips, at least not at the speed of what they're making today. But after the semiconductor war, in just 4 years, everything has changed. Nvidia's market share has collapsed to just 50%. The rest of the competition is local Chinese tech, including Huawei. Now, what Biden did was disastrous, but the new administration is about to make things worse with their global threat to Chinese gear. They are threatening any user in the world who dares to use Huawei chips, and this will only spur China to run faster and develop more chips, and China will apply it at record speed in their industries.
So the next layer requires energy. The layer above that is just happening now. And it's really, really important that we understand that ultimately the winners of the last industrial revolution wasn't the country that invented it. It was the country that applied it. And the United States applied steel, applied energy faster than any country. Everybody else was worried about things like labor and horses being replaced by cars and, those kind of matters. But the United States we just took it and ran with it. And so the infrastructural layer above that is about the application of the technology. It's about not being afraid of it, wanting to engage it, reskilling our workforce so that we're able to apply it, encouraging people to adopt it.
Now what he said is right. The winner of the AI race will be those who apply it the fastest and the most in the real world. Now the US used to be able to do it in the past, but the future is about to be dominated by China. They have the biggest industrial base, and under the heat of the trade war, they have no choice but to innovate. As such, Chinese factories and companies need to use AI to increase production and output. As this demand grows, local tech players like Huawei, they will move in to fill the gap. Now in his keynote, Jensen pointed out the obvious, and it pays to go through them. Chinese tech companies have 3 key advantages the US just doesn't have. They have cost-effective power and lots of land available that is hooked up to the ecosystem. So startups can set up shop fast, and giant companies like Huawei can create multiple campuses around the country. Secondly, they have skilled and affordable talent. China produces more STEM graduates than the US, at least 4 to 5 times more in 2020, and today is probably even more. Plus, salaries in China are lower than America. So they have a limitless pool of talent for innovation. They can also stretch the dollar or RMB further than American companies. Finally, they have big government support. China has a big trade surplus, which they can funnel to their chips fund, which is over $100 billion today. So companies like Huawei, they have access to cheap funding for R&D, and this closes the technology gap even further. So given enough time, China will build out their AI chips base. But there's also another point we have to make. Unlike the US, who's preventing Nvidia from selling to the world, Without restrictions, Beijing is different. They allow local companies to sell their chips virtually everywhere. If you need it, China will sell to you. And there's big speculation that private companies in Malaysia they are thinking of buying Huawei chips to build their own AI system. And it has reached the point that Trump's tech advisor David Sachs is freaking out. So it seems the full Chinese stack is here. Now sure, Biden diffusion rule might have rescinded, but make no mistake, blocking out the $50 billion Chinese market, the biggest consumer of chips, isn't a smart move. Now the Chinese market is more or less self-sufficient. Many BRICS countries and trading partners are also ramping up their AI capabilities, and this presents a lucrative market for China to sell to down the road. Now Malaysia, for example, wants to become one of the biggest hubs in the AI supply chain. In just half a year, their monthly imports of GPUs from Taiwan flew to the moon. It went from $60 million to nearly $2 billion. And that's a 30x increase, and given enough time, China will fill in the gap. Now, it's true that the US is trying to prevent countries from using Huawei chips through export control threats. But new Chinese entrants can always create their own advanced AI chips at a fraction of the cost. And if the US continues to decline while China rises, there will come a tipping point where the rewards outweigh the risks. It's really ironic, it's free trade that will actually save the US chip industry, but the fear of China getting the AI gear is clouding Trump and his team. Now we have to quantify how dedicated China is in pushing the tech progress. It's truly fearsome. And that's what happens when you don't waste money with military bases all over the world. Now, China today views tech innovation as the core of national development, so this push is critical to the whole country. As a result, the entire economy is geared towards high tech investments. The old industries like steel production and chemicals are no longer the focus. Software, electronics, and scientific research they are growing like never before. Fixed asset investment is growing at 8 to 17% a year compounded for these industries. And this is simply incredible. And beyond just chips, there's a reason why Nvidia wants to have a foothold in the Chinese market. It's because of robotics and what China can offer.
Now, the amazing thing about human robotics is not just the fact that if it worked, it could be quite versatile. It is likely the only robot that is likely to work. And the reason for that is because technology needs scale. Most of the robotic systems we've had so far are too low volume. And those low volume systems will never achieve the technology scale to get the flywheel going far enough, fast enough, so that we're willing to dedicate enough technology into it to make it better. But human or robot, it is likely to be the next multi-trillion-dollar industry.
So Jensen wants scale, the ability of an economy or industry to manufacture a ton of high-value products, and Beijing offers that. It's the reason why they call China the world's factory after all. Now, China will be the biggest consumer and manufacturer of robots, and to make such complex machines, you obviously need AI chips to run them. According to the IFR, China is one of the global leaders in industrial robot adoption. They have even surpassed Japan and Germany. Their industries are running 470 robots per 10,000 employees, and that's around 4.7%. Imagine the next 10 or 20 years. When we get humanoid robots working in factories, things will scale up lightning fast. And if Nvidia doesn't sell their chips today, tomorrow's robots will be powered by Huawei. Now, if you think the chip war was bad, let's say this together now. Things can always get worse because it just did. The G7 countries, in their infinite wisdom, are planning to slap tariffs on China. Yes, the craziness isn't over yet, and we are about to reach a new low. The G7 economies are now discussing tariffs on oversupplied and low value Chinese goods. Once again, we are back to the classic overcapacity argument and non market practices. However, this is once again trying to reform what free trade is all about. China sells stuff that people want, and that's why there is a market in the first place. But let's add some context to this mess. The US closed the de minimis exemption that allowed small parcels to escape the tariffs. And this is not a small amount. Collectively, China sells nearly $100 billion worth of these small value products. But thanks to the trade wars, Trump has subjected all this stuff to tariffs as well. And so the $800 threshold is gone, and in many cases, a 30% tariff might be enough to wipe out profit margins for quite a few products, especially if they are very basic exports. And we can see that the US buys a lot of low value products from China. Think about clothes, shoes, and makeup kits from Shein and Temu, and this amounts to around $2 billion every single month. And if we assume half of exports are no longer competitive, then $1 billion worth will be split to the rest of the world. The UK, Japan, Germany, and the rest of the G7 could face a flood of Chinese exports. But let's turn this argument around. Because Chinese exporters are forced to divert some supply to Europe, the supply there grows, and that puts EU consumers at a very good advantage. They can effectively demand lower prices from China. So now they pay less, and for once in a blue moon, they can enjoy lower prices. China is now exporting deflation to them. Is that such a horrible thing? But what do we know, right? It seems that the EU is really considering punishing Chinese exports to save their local producers and retailers. They want to impose a flat fee on small packages entering the bloc. The UK and Japan also wants to follow suit, and for sure this will be tempting. But once again, who really pays for the tariffs? Now, costs for EU consumers are going to go up, and considering the energy crisis in Europe, how likely can local producers compete with Chinese goods? And Chinese exporters themselves, they are shifting production of low quality stuff away from China. Why? Because making stuff, especially low value items, is becoming less feasible there. The Chinese themselves are rapidly moving up the value chain. Chinese companies are investing big into Southeast Asia. The US used to be the biggest investor, but everything changed in 2023. Now, China invested $13.2 billion into the manufacturing sector there, around double that of US companies. And in 2025, we can definitely expect US investments to collapse. Trump wants to reshore everything. Sooner or later, the majority of lower value industries will enter countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, and Indonesia. Designed in China and made in Vietnam, that's going to be the future of TV screens and apparel. So, if the G7 wants to stop cheap goods completely, they need to punish the whole of Asia. And how feasible is that? Then we will be in a world where every country starts their own brand of protectionism. But let's try to look into the future. Going forward, China has to increase their own domestic consumption, and their policies are starting to reflect that in spades. Now, China's deficit has reached an incredible $367 billion in January to April. That's an increase of 50% versus a year earlier. Beijing is basically firing on all cylinders. They know increasing domestic spending is now a national priority. That's why we're witnessing an incredible increase in Chinese deficits to build back their consumer class. And if China becomes a new consumption giant, they might just reject Western goods in retaliation down the road. So trying to corner China might work today, but this is a country of over 1.4 billion people, and the middle class there is still growing. So the G7 has to work out a compromise with Beijing, because just slapping on a tariff like the US will most definitely backfire down the road. But let me know what you think. Will the US tear down the AI chips export ban? And will the G7 really punish Chinese goods? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.